Australia thing, and his thing was just off the cuff. Like he was up here for ballooning, and that was his interest, and then it happened to overhear a conversation on the Bushrangers, and then, what's going on with that? And then it sort of flowed into that from there. But there is a lot of history here, and see, the gold fields were out mainly around Forbes, Eugowra, and then Forbes and that area out there. And in those days, they had to get from out there back into Sydney. So the way to do it was on the stagecoach line back through from Eugowra back through to Orange, Bathurst, and then away they went down into Sydney. And that's where all the gold flowed. So it was probably only natural and only a matter of time before someone come up with the idea of being able to rob the stagecoach out there in Eugowra. And that's what Frank Gardner's group did.
And Ben Hall's like the most famous around Australia after Ned Kelly, but then you've got Frank Gardner, which was on the level with Ben Hall at that point in time in the 1860s.
Yeah, well, that was the thing. See, Frank Gardner got in early. That was Gardner's gang that did the Escort Rock robbery. Ben Hall was part of the group then. And if you read the history of it, they don't say that much about Ben Hall when they tell that story. They tell about the other bushrangers and different things that happened, but Ben Hall's role in that was played down because there's no actual evidence. They all wore masks that Ben Hall was one of them. But I've got no doubt that he probably was, but it's just that there wasn't the evidence there. They all split up, they went different directions, trying to put the police off. So,
and Frank Gardner got the better out of it, didn't it? Because he immigrated over to the US and he ended up living until the early 1900s when the rest died in like the 1865, mid-1860s.
A lot of them were hung and some of them were shot, and they all sort of went their own way, but Ben Hall then went his own way and then reformed with a couple of the boys and then started his own gang, if you like, after the Great Gold Robbery, with Johnny Gilbert, Johnny O'Malley, Johnny Vane, I think, and who was the other one? Mickey Burke. And then Burke, I think, was shot as well, and then Johnny Vane gave himself up, and there were all sorts of different things that happened with him. So, but yeah, and at that time it wasn't unusual for a lot of those bushrangers to form little alliances with people that they knew from their own town areas, and then they'd do their own little robberies along the way and with their own group, and then they'd form up and do other bigger jobs, and they had a good communication system. They all knew what was going on, and they'd work one area and then they'd move off to another area. Police would go in there, and police always seemed to be a step or two behind them. And they had a tremendous telegraph system, so they knew where the police were moving to, and they'd just drift off into another area and do their robberies there.
How about Benny Hall was pretty well liked in this town, Canowindra, because he sort of held the place up and brought everyone into town into the pub. With that 3-day earlier version of this pub, which has been...
That's it, yeah. Well, see, that robbery here, they were here for 3 days, and it was mainly due to the inclement weather. They knew the police couldn't get over here from Cowra or in from Forbes, so they happened to be this side. They held the pub up for 3 days, they partied. Anyone they found out there, they brought them in here at gunpoint, and they just sat around and they drank and they ate and they danced, and they had a lady playing the pianola or the piano, whatever it was.
Where was the local policeman?
They'd locked him up. They locked him in his own cells up here at the top end of town.
So he missed the party.
So he wasn't involved in it. But from their point of view, it was a fairly safe 3 days. And then when they'd finished on day 3, they just paid their bill and away they went. But they'd been in here, I think, 2, maybe 3 times. They'd actually come into Canowindra. They'd robbed the store here a couple of times as well. They knew it was fairly easy pickings. They only had one police officer.
But they still paid their bill.
Still paid their bill, but as I said, probably with the money that they stole from the people that they brought in here anyway. And but as far as their popularity went, when you read between the lines, and some of the stories mention the fact that they gave things to people when they stole, they donated to families that weren't that well off, and they helped along the way. And there's a lot of cases when you read the history books of them leaving money with people that they'd robbed. They'd leave a lot of the silver and coins with people, and they'd take notes and just so that they had something to continue on with. But from what I've read of it, it seems like they did that fairly often with the people that were worse off. So there was a fair bit of that, and that ensured that people would say nothing about them. And I don't think it was so much a fear. I think back then, you look at Ned Kelly's connections, that was all family groups that they were aligned with. So had a good cockatoo network. They knew where the police were going and what they were doing, and the same thing happened with Ben Hall. And you find in country areas, it's still the same today. Like, people are very, the family ties are very strong in country areas. And I guess you find it's not just country areas, it's probably all over the place, but people look after family, and it's an Australian thing, and they did it back then quite a lot, and that was why the Bushrangers in a lot of cases managed to operate for as long as they did where they did.
Because you've got history here as well through the family.
Yes, yeah, my family goes back a long time, and as I said to you, the first I didn't realise that one of my family was actually picked up the first time that Frank Gardner was arrested for stealing horses. There's one of my family involved with it as well. So
back in the 1860s.
Back in the 1860s, yeah. So, and as I said, I had an uncle here 50 odd years ago that was riding a horse that I actually learnt to ride on in one of the Bushranger reenactments. So we go back a long way. My family had properties outside town here as well, grandparents, and both my parents were born here.
Talking about family, Frank Gardner's family done okay, didn't they? Because rumour has it there was gold up in the hills.
Yes, yeah. After the escort robbery, they said a lot of the gold was picked up, and they said it depends which history book you believe, but you know, there's been a story, and I won't quote the book, of grandchildren of gardeners coming back out of the States and going up and recovering gold from where he'd supposedly buried part of his share up at Canowindra. So, look, the truth's hard to say. You don't know. It just depends which author you want to read and how much stock you put in it. But yeah, there were stories of that happening, and the two grandsons were supposed to have got a lot of holes dug up there. The owner of the property apparently went up there and found where they'd been digging around up there. And when they left with a lot more boxes than they had when they arrived. So
Heavy boxes.
Heavy boxes. And you know, that's been reported. As a matter of history, I don't really know. Just as I say, it depends whose side of it you want to believe.
It's a rich history though, isn't it?
Say again?
It's rich. It's a rich history.
It's rich history. Yeah, this area is steeped in it, and that was the main, if you want claims to fame, and that the gold, Ben Hall's gang here and their operations here, other than the ballooning that happens here now, they're the two things for Canowindra. That's what most people tend to know about Canowindra. And these days the wine as well, because there's some damn
and
good
the
wine
fish
here.
potentially as well.
Oh, the fish fossils? Yeah.
Which is pretty important as well,
Yeah,
I think, moving forward.
there's a lot of people now. They've done some extensions up there at the Fish Fossil Museum, and there are a lot more people coming in to see that than just the ballooning and to hear about the bushranger and the bushranger side of it. So, yeah, we're only a little town, but we've got a few little claims to fame, like every country town has, I suppose.
Just around the back, you've got it's got a new name now, but the little lane down running by the river. There's a little bit of history there as well. It's like veggie markets or something like that, isn't it?
Ah, out at Fisherman's Bend, that's what you were talking
Bend,
about. Yeah, look, in the old days, they used to call it Chinaman's Lane out there, and when I grew up as a kid here, if you went for a swim, there's a swimming hole on the corner out there. And we used to all go out there as kids, and you'd swim in the corner, and you know, and years later, and back then, if you wanted to quite drink, you'd sneak out there onto the riverbank. And in those days, the market gardens the Chinese had were along the riverbank. It's very fertile land out there. It's mostly lucerne growing along there now, but it was always called Chinaman's Lane. And then as the years have changed, and after I left here, the name's gone back to, or changed to Fisherman's Bend. But yeah, there's a Chinese community out there, and that's where they did their gardening. So again, a little bit of history. Yeah.
Do you know what brought them here in the first place?
Say again?
Do you know what brought them here in the first place?
I would imagine it was probably the gold.
Yeah.
The main areas were out at Forbes and Ugara for the gold, and it was just this was a transport area that was particularly going back from along what they called Escort Way now, going back into Orange and then down to Bathurst and then through to Sydney, which is where all the gold went to. So, and I think it's fairly common knowledge that Lambing Flat or Young down there is where there are quite a lot of Chinese operating and working the gold mines, and I imagine that's probably how they came to be out here as well. Yeah, all good.